What's happening, guys? I'm Abby Martin, and this is Breaking the Set. So last week, we traveled down to New Orleans, Louisiana, to examine the city 9 years after the most catastrophic natural disaster to ever hit the U.S., Hurricane Katrina. The images of New Orleans and beyond in the aftermath of the storm are no doubt seared into all of our memories. From people left to die, trapped on rooftops for days on end without food nor water, to entire neighborhoods flooded with toxic water and sewage, Katrina represented one of the biggest government response failures in modern history. Now, you may be asking, why now? Why go there 9 years later? Well, it's because these disasters don't just go away once the cameras are off. In fact, the ramifications of Katrina can be seen today all throughout the city. Because while the French Quarter is booming, just miles down the road in poor black neighborhoods like the 9th Ward, it still looks like the storm just hit yesterday. Murder, racism, and police brutality also plagued the city, serving as a stark reminder of the days when mercenary forces patrolled the streets and cops and civilian militias were given carte blanche authority to kill looters. So today, you'll hear the untold stories of several people who experienced the pain and suffering of Katrina firsthand. With all the horrors that came out of the event, with the government abandoning tens of thousands of people when they needed it the most, the community stepped up to the plate to fill the void. So don't go anywhere, because it's time to break the set.
It was a terrible mistake, and we're working very hard to make up for it.
And once again, to put something on the air, it's a flat-out lie.
Have you ever had sex with Governor Rick Perry?
No, wait, do not answer that.
I want you to watch what we're about to do, because you've never seen anything like this on television.
What we need is to question more and to keep it uncensored, real and raw. My simple mission is to change the globe. I'ma do it with this passion and fire was told. These words are hard hitting, you're watching your neck, but you need to tune in, because we're breaking the set. Breaking the set. Breaking the set.
After more than 1,800 deaths, $108 billion in damages, and almost a decade of recovery efforts, Hurricane Katrina is now remembered as the single most devastating natural disaster in U.S. history. There were more than 50 failures of levees across the city designed to hold back the water, leading to 80% of New Orleans being flooded. The construction of the lower 9th Ward levee in particular was called into question after a barge destroyed it, directing the worst of the flood into the poorest of areas. Although that story has been told and retold, what's more often forgotten is that the response to the natural disaster was anything but natural. Instead of addressing the catastrophe like the humanitarian crisis it was, government officials instead treated New Orleans like a war zone. Thousands of police, National Guard troops, and active duty soldiers invaded the city. And before emergency aid could even make its way into the hands of New Orleans residents, private mercenaries like Blackwater were already on the streets. In many instances, the combat-ready soldiers for hire were assigned to protect the private property of the city's wealthiest residents. And amidst the chaotic scramble by the federal government to deliver relief on the ground, defense contractors had turned large swaths of the city into an armed prison. One defense official told the Army Times that, quote, "This place is going to look like little Somalia. We're going to go out and take this city back. This will be a combat operation to get this city under control." And part of that control was in the form of police ordering that civilians turn in their firearms, even ones that were legally registered. But the aftermath of Katrina had implications that resonated far beyond Louisiana, exposing the tragic reality of the blatant racial divide that continues today in 21st century America. And 9 years later, entire black neighborhoods are largely abandoned. Miles of roadways remain in disrepair, and an entire city continues its slow and painful recovery. According to 2010 census data, nearly a third of the population has left the city, primarily in poorer communities, and those that have left will most likely never return. And although 10,000 houses will have been restored by the end of this year, it's a drop in the bucket for the work that still needs to be done. In fact, we observed houses that hadn't been touched in years, with tens of thousands of blighted properties still littered across certain neighborhoods. Look, it's not just about remembering this tragedy and rehashing what we already know. The lessons of the hurricane need to be heeded now, because it's not a matter of if, but when the next Katrina hits. And the question remains, how will we respond if the government treats us like refugees in our own country and goes to war with us again? When looking back at the areas worst affected by Hurricane Katrina, nothing stands out more than the lower Ninth Ward. Unlike the famous French Quarter, the lower Ninth Ward suffered tremendous devastation, from which it's far from recovered. But in 2007, one man, Ward Mac McClendon, opened up the only community center in the neighborhood, known as the Lower Ninth Ward Village, complete with a skate park, computer classes, job training services, and much more. Now, unfortunately, this past May, the center closed down after corporate sponsors rescinded on their pledge to fund the project. But even with all the adversity he's faced, Matt continues to help restore this historic neighborhood back to its culturally vibrant roots and empower the residents of the community. I sat down with him while in New Orleans, and I started by asking him to talk about his experience when Katrina hit.
When I got here, people were starving. I saw people dead, floating in this water. And I became numb. I don't think I thought about anything I'd done. I just reacted. These people just wanted water. They just wanted food. And I learned later on, we was turning down water and food. We wouldn't even let the people that came to give them food and water give it to them.
Why was the lower Ninth Ward hit so much harder than the rest of the city?
My community, which is the lower Ninth Ward, was the last community they allowed people to actually come in. They had a look and leave policy. I don't know if you knew about that. Months later, you could get on a bus, look at your property and leave. And they was calling us refugees. I got very angry behind that, but I found out why. When you call National Guard, the Army, or anything, they are trained to take over an area and control it. Whatever is there is refugees. Why they didn't tell the people why they was doing that? Why I was called a refugee in my own country with no explanation. And a lot of people who 9 years later are still confused about that. We're not in Iraq and we're not the enemy. Why were we treated like that? And then the bigger question, why are we still treated like that today?
Beyond the blighted homes, what do you think the biggest challenges are still facing the Ninth Ward?
When you saw them talk about the lower Ninth Ward, what you saw is poor, poverty, uneducated area. That's the biggest lie ever told. But we settled for that. You can't be no dummy and have more home ownership than anybody. You can't be that much of a dummy. You know, but we are quick in America. I don't know too much about any other country. To assume. We're quick to do that. I'm proud of you guys. 9 years later, you come here because you didn't get it from the media that we are less than a third of my community back. You didn't get that from the media. You got it from word of mouth. Somebody said, no, the French Quarters was fixed because it was never damaged. The Superdome is, better than ever. Go 5 miles outside of that. And the devastation, I bring you back a town where the levees broke. At best, they moved the houses out of the middle of the street.
So the government creates this problem, but then the burden is put on the community to fix the problem.
You're absolutely right. when it don't have a community. I got less than a third of my community back 9 years later. So who are you asking to fight for your community? The way we're going about doing this is a not American problem. This is a world problem.
Human problem.
This is a human problem. And I think what we need to do is ask ourselves, how important is life?
New Orleans consistently ranks among the highest murder rates in the entire country. What factors do you think contribute to this violence in places like the 9th Ward?
Our public officials think the answer to our problem, you know what they think it is? Build bigger prisons with more beds. We can't build prisons fast enough for the problem that we're creating. How can we solve this problem? 2 ways. Better education and jobs. Good paying jobs, crime would go down 50 to 40% in less than 2 months. I know that. You probably know that. Why we don't do that? Right now, to rebuild my community, we're getting less than, you ready for this? Less than 2% of the work.
If you and I know the problem, and they know the problem, what's stopping them from fixing it?
Because crime do pay. I make more money for incarcerating somebody than sending them to school. And that don't even seem like it's connected, but then that is your real culprit right there.
Considering all the obstacles you've faced over the years, Mac, what keeps you from giving up?
You can't close the door once it's open. You have to learn how to embrace what's inside. And that's what I've been able to do. You know, most people ask me, how can you still do this? I say, how can I not do this? I lost 2 grandbabies since I started this project. Neither one of them made 2 years old. I lost my youngest child at 21, giving birth. Right after she gave me another grandson, she died. I lost my mom a few months ago. And then they said, how can you keep doing this? How can I not do this? I don't care what you decide to do, you're going to be tested. Do you give up because you have a test? My house is facing foreclosure on no fault of my own. House I've had since '99. But at the end of the day, as much as that's my dream house, but at the end of the day, it's just a house. It's still just a thing. Most people in America will never get what I'm talking about because they're robots and don't even know it. They're robots to a system that's been put in place, and they built it on quicksand. How can you expect it to stand? That's what America was built on. And we keep building on quicksand.
Coming up, I'll speak with 2 men who faced down a white militia in the days after Katrina and lived to tell the tale. Stay tuned.
Over the mic is all feeling to go.
Did you know the press is the only industry specifically mentioned in the Constitution?
Stand by.
That's because a free and open press is critical to our democracy.
Track Alpha. Roll Alpha.
In fact, the single biggest threat facing our nation today is the corporate takeover of our government and our press.
Stand by, camera 1.
We've been hijacked by a handful of powerful transnational corporations, They will profit by destroying what our founding fathers once built up. I'm Tom Hartman, and on this show, we reveal the big picture of what's actually going on in the world. We go beyond identifying the problem.
We try to fix it.
Rational debate and a real discussion of the critical issues facing America.
Stand by on camera, go.
Ready to join the movement? Then welcome to the big picture.
Out of all the chaos and violence that's emerged in the aftermath of Katrina, there's perhaps nothing more disturbing than what happened in the neighborhood of Algiers Point. Just days after Katrina hit and law and order began to break down, bands of white militias riding pickup trucks and carrying shotguns began to patrol the streets, using deadly force against blacks when they deemed it necessary. Members claimed they were carrying out vigilante justice in order to protect the streets from looters. But according to a joint investigation by The Nation and ProPublica, at least 11 African Americans were shot by whites in Algiers in the days and weeks following Katrina. All the while, NOLA police turned a blind eye to the violence. Take a listen to what a member of one of the militias said about the experience.
I never thought 11 and a half months ago I'd be walking down the streets of New Orleans with 238s in my pocket and a shotgun over my shoulder. It was great. It was like pheasant season in South Dakota.
And just last week, Cam Edwards, host of the NRA's news show, praised the actions of the militias during Katrina, saying that Algiers residents were, quote, looking out for each other by walking the streets with firearms. This rewriting of history means that to this day, there's been absolutely no justice for the victims of these gangs. While in New Orleans, I sat down with two men who took up arms themselves for protection against the militias. Malik Rahim is a former Black Panther member, and Scott Crow is one of the most notable anarchists in America today. Both men joined up to found Common Ground Collective in the days after Katrina, one of the largest grassroots organizations to provide vital social and medical services to fill the void left by government. Over the first 4 years of existence, Common Ground did everything from building health clinics to setting up housing for thousands of displaced residents. In the 4 years after Katrina, Common Ground served over 200,000 people, and to this day serves as a model for disaster response from Indonesia to New York. I started the interview by asking Malik if he was prepared for the aftermath of Katrina.
Absolutely nothing in my life prepared me to the aftermath of Katrina. The first 2 days was normal. And then that Wednesday, you know, when people seeing that there was no hope, when they're seeing that the state and the city and the federal government wasn't planning on doing anything, when the horror stories from the convention center start leaking out, then that's when the whole dynamics shift. That's when Katrina shifted from being a disaster to a tragedy. Mm-hmm. And in this area here, we had a white militia that took up arms, and you had to pass a paper bag test. If you was darker than a paper bag, you couldn't come through Algiers Point. You know, they had blocked off all the streets. Firemen stopped being firemen and started being guards. You know, 1 minute you was doing rescue work with police, and the next minute they was pulling guns on you.
Talk about the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, the first 72 hours. What was that experience like for you, and what did you see?
The white militia here was gathering ground. And you have to understand, they look like the Klan without the hats. They were driving around in the back of trucks drunk with guns pointed at black people, not anybody else, drawing guns on them and shooting people. And you know, when I first got here, the first thing that we did was we covered up this body, this bullet-riddled body over here that you could smell for 2 blocks coming over there. And there's another dead body over here that was bullet-riddled. Now, we'd already seen drowned people, but now we're seeing bullet-riddled. So who killed them? Was it the police or was it the militia? And so at the time, we didn't know which one it was because both of them were out of control. New Orleans police, long history of systemic racism, a systemic out of control police system. So basically when I came to take up arms in a community that I was invited into with other people from this community, black people from this community, 2 white guys and 3 black guys from this community, took up arms to defend ourselves, defend the community against being killed by the militia. They were threatening Malik. They were driving by, pointing their guns at him, saying they were going to get you, Mayor. I don't even know if you remembered that. They were drawing their guns at him, and so we were basically like, we were like, you're not going to do that. And then the police drew guns on us constantly. This is something that people in these communities have to go through every day. But it was happening to white people who didn't live here, and they kept saying that we were going to overtake. So this is the situation. But they weren't doing anything to help people. They wanted to restore law and order. They did not want to. You have to understand that there's like people trapped in their attics. There's people trapped on their rooftops. We're not talking about like a few hundred people. We're talking tens of thousands of people are going to die. And all they want to do is restore law and order. And they're turning a blind eye to the militia in this neighborhood. So we started to ask the people in the neighborhood, and they said, can you get the rotted meat out of here? Can you get the dead dogs out of here? Can you stop the militia can we get some medical services? And so from that, this beautiful thing started to emerge. So we took this incredibly historic, terrible situation and tried to turn it around, because what there was a crack in history that opened where power had lost all its control, and a space opened for the people from below to come and actually try to do something.
Well, Scott, how do you feel when you hear organizations like the NRA actually praising the Algiers militia?
It was infuriating. I mean, these guys, I was in an armed standoff with them, and I was thinking, and I'd always been like, well, maybe I should have pulled the trigger. And then I would have killed these people, and I would have gone to prison, and like all these bad things would have happened, would have stopped them from killing other people. But then when I hear the NRA praising them today, like in the 9th anniversary, I'm like, what's wrong with you? These men and women were killing people and bragging about it. They were treating them, like Malik was saying, as other. As anybody who was desperate was other, and treated like dogs or less than dogs, and like they should be killed. They called it pheasant season, shooting black youth. They were like, it's pheasant season. And I'm sorry I'm so angry about it, but it's infuriating. It's not just the police. This is the systemic part of this.
Malik, why do you think the government failed so abysmally to react and provide adequate relief in the aftermath?
If to give the government too much credit by saying they failed. Because if you say that you failed at something, that means that you tried. You never tried.
Damn right.
So you knew it from the get-go, that we had a ship to run across this levee here, and it didn't break. Why? Because this levee protected whites. It protected the U.S. naval base that was here. So an ocean freighter could run across this levee, and it didn't break. I'm gonna tell you something. Long before Hurricane Katrina, New Orleans had already been inundated. Hurricane despair, hurricane poverty, hurricane racism. They had already inundated this area. So, only thing that Katrina really did is kind of expose it. And because that no one cared is the reason why we facing the ramification of it now. Because those little 9-year-old kids and them little 16-year-old kids that was in the convention center that you showed no love or compassion to is now 16, 18, 20 years old with a gun and have no love in their heart. Because there wasn't no trauma counselors. The first high school that was open in the aftermath of Katrina for poor blacks had up to 75 kids in one classroom. It had more guards than teachers. It's not no accident that Chicago and New Orleans have such high murder rates. Look what we did in both cities. We destroyed all the public housing without giving no economic opportunity to no one. So who was the the equal opportunity employer? The drug dealers.
Mm-hmm.
Then we put them in jail where we transform dogs into wolves.
Mm-hmm.
Wolves run in packs, and they kill in packs.
Scott, talk about Common Ground. What type of services did the organization provide, and how many volunteers came through and worked with the group?
At one point, we had 7 clinics running, right? We also had, how many? Just 9 distribution centers. We were working with the First Nations communities all along the Gulf Coast. We were working in the Vietnamese communities. There was like fishing communities, the Creole communities, and all these rural areas where nobody was at, as well as what we were doing in New Orleans. And the thing is, Common Ground operated as an organization, but also as a network. So we were also spinning off organizations as we were going. And we had mobile clinics going. We had a bicycle repair shop, which is spun off. We started a women's center that still exists today. There was the rebuilding. We did worker cooperatives. There's a number of projects. Any given week, there could be 2,000 people on the ground from around here and coming from around the country working on 150 projects or programs at any time between 2005 and 2008. And people were willing to do whatever it took to make it happen for people that didn't even know. And then those people who had a leg up were, you know, they were just trying to build their self-determination for their community. And I think that's an amazing thing, because disasters reveal more than anything under the failures of capitalism and governments.
Malik, what lessons can we all learn from Katrina?
What make America a great nation is its people, its ability to come out and help those in time of need. The greatest effort of Common Ground wasn't the work that it did, it was who did the work. That you had over 20,000 whites to come down into black communities that's right now is still classified as being some of the most dangerous communities in this city, that didn't listen to what the media was portraying, that came down here and they didn't find no thugs. They find God-fearing people, hard-working people that just by circumstance and condition happen to be poor.
Damn right.
That's what they found. And then at the same time that they was dispelling that myth among us blacks, it was another myth that was being dispelled. That was the myth that all whites was evil. All whites was oppressive. Only thing whites wanted to do to blacks is to either oppress them or exploit them. They came down here and they saw this. It was more than just a relief organization. Common Ground came here and brought hope to an area that had lost hope. It brought justice to an area that has thrived and only lived in injustice. It brought opportunity to a community that was only seeing despair.
But I think that Common Ground in the beginning of the 20th century here, the 21st century here, was a time that people can now look at and go like, this is what people can do when disasters happen. Now, as climate change becomes more real and disasters happen much more, economic disasters continue to happen, the failures of capitalism, I think that things like Common Ground and Occupy Sandy, things like that, become this place that people can look at as a reference point to go like, what can I do in my community? Wait, we can do this together? We don't need the government to do this? Oh, we don't need the corporations to lie to us? And we can do that? Those are the legacies that I'm the proudest of.
That's our show, you guys. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to join me tomorrow when I break the set all over again. After more than 1,800 deaths, $108 billion in damages, and almost a decade of recovery efforts, Hurricane Katrina is now remembered as the single most devastating natural disaster in U.S. history. There were more than 50 failures of levees across the city designed to hold back the water, leading to 80% of New Orleans being flooded. The construction of the lower 9th Ward levee in particular was called into question. What's happening, guys? I'm Abby Martin, and this is Breaking the Set. So last week we traveled down to New Orleans, Louisiana, to examine the city 9 years after the most catastrophic natural disaster to ever hit the U.S. Hurricane Katrina. The images of New Orleans and beyond in the aftermath of the storm are no doubt seared into all of our memories. From people left to die, trapped on rooftops for days on end without food nor water to the city, serving as a stark reminder of the days when mercenary forces patrolled the streets and cops and civilian militias were given carte blanche authority to kill looters. So today, you'll hear the untold stories of several people who experienced the pain and suffering of Katrina firsthand. With all the horrors that came out of the event, with the government abandoning tens of thousands of people when they needed it the most, the community stepped up to the plate to fill the void. So don't go anywhere, because it's time to break the set.
It was a terrible mistake, and we're working very hard to make up for it.
And once again, we put something on the air. It's a flat-out lie.
Have you ever had sex with Governor Rick Perry?
No, wait. Do not answer that.
I want you to watch what we're about to do because you've never seen anything like this on television.
What we need is to question more and to keep it uncensored, real and raw. My simple mission is to change the globe. I'ma do it with this passion and fire was told. These ones are hard hit.
Entire neighborhoods flooded with toxic water and sewage, Katrina represented one of the biggest government response failures in modern history. Now, you may be asking, why now? Why go there 9 years later? Well, it's because these disasters don't just go away once the cameras are off. In fact, the ramifications of Katrina can be seen today all throughout the city. Because while the French Quarter is booming, just miles down the road in poor black neighborhoods like the 9th Ward, it still looks like the storm just hit yesterday. Murder, racism, and police brutality also plague the city.